Okay, good afternoon or evening, everyone. I'm Max Syedtollan. Thank you very much to Alex and West for inviting me here today. I'll be delivering the lecture, the title of which you can see here, 4 assignments, speculative fieldwork and the role of investigator in archaeologies of the contemporary past. I should say I'm here as a representative from the School of Research Studies at the University of Galloway in Scotland, where I've come. And this lecture tour has been supported by the Greater Lanarkshire Auricular Research Council. So I'll sort of break up what the structure of the lecture is going to be, starting with a sort of overview of archaeology of the contemporary past, just looking at the roots of this discipline in the 70s and how it's developed into the present, and then sort of viewing this through fieldwork that I conducted myself between 2019 and 2020, and sort of problematizing the role of speculative fieldwork, whatever that might mean, and how the investigator plays an active role in shaping this. So, archaeology of the contemporary past. Harrison has sort of encapsulated what this discipline is about. The notion that if the past is always encompassed within the present, archaeology might be understood to be purely concerned with the present and not really with the past at all. And this discipline sort of has its roots in the British so-called post-processual or contextual archaeology of the 70s and the 80s. Ian Hodder was sort of the progenitor of this movement, and the growth of the discipline was catalysed by the publication of his Symbolism and Structuralism in Archaeology that was published in 1982, sort of leading to a sort of a flurry of studies taking this approach of applying an archaeological lens to present culture, notably studies of punk material culture by Hodder again in 1982, followed by the immortal Shanks and Tilley 1987 paper on the design of Swedish and British beer cans, and Hodder then with a difficult second album studying the social significance of bow ties in a pet food factory. And this is a still from the Shanks and Tilley, and I suppose you can see there being a sort of affinity here with what was going to emerge from within the field of anthropology, with just the general field of material culture. But the approach here tended to took a more sort of forensic approach than that of material culture, tending to look at the material rather than cultural strands. And the aims here, Hodder argued, interpreting material culture was analogous to reading texts and distinct from straightforwardly reading off from evidence through middle-range theory. The contextual focus on material culture as text was, Hodder argued, distinct from a conventional structuralist focus on language. Hodder, 1989. Contextual archaeology aimed to supersede while simultaneously integrating structuralism in studies undertaken by archaeologists that were not concerned with the abstract principles of meaning and particular historical circumstance. Abstract principles of mind, as they would be if literal structuralists, but were concerned with context, meaning, and particular historical circumstances, as well as with the generative principles which unify particular culture with particular strength and historical material context. Leon, 1982. So the developments in the field. Fuster notes how British post-processual ethnoarchaeologies emphasised the role of informants in understanding the contemporary meaning of material cultures, which proved influential in later approaches into the present. The controversial, it's not very professional to say it's controversial in a PowerPoint presentation. The controversial Van project, Bailey et al. 2009, is a case in point. This sort of consisted of this later, well, there were 2 groups of archaeologists, if you can picture such a thing. There were 2 groups of archaeologists, if you can picture such a thing, one earlier and one later, and the earlier group of archaeologists had, without realising they were contributing to a later study, abandoned a van on the site of some forgotten, probably irrelevant archaeological dig in England, and the later group then excavated this van as if it was an archaeological artifact, or I think we can take, because they applied this lens, it was an archaeological artifact, which is sort of the point, and the authors note that the aim of the exercise was to see what archaeological methods could contribute to the understanding of a modern object about which so much could already be assumed to be known. Anyway, we can move on to the fieldwork, which was undertaken by myself between 2019 and 2020, starting in Angel Mounds in the US, before proceeding to Westford, also in the US, then returning to Scotland, where I'm based, in Ellenagus, in the Highlands, before moving to Cairo in Egypt. And then the project was sort of prematurely terminated, but we managed to salvage most of it. I also, I kept a journal for the whole thing, and the results of the research I'll just sort of read them verbatim from the journal. I also decided to set it to music, so that will be happening as well. So we've been stationed in here for 3 weeks when the next letter arrived. As before, it bore no instruction of who sent it. The previous letters had all been delivered, and promptly it scarcely mattered who was sending them. I was to go to Angel Mounds. My employer had access to property, including this house in Globus. While I was here, I monitored local radio. There was a channel I'd found which airs the sound from cowboy movies. These radio plays were near impossible to follow, but the audience are presumably familiar with the sources, and the broadcasts merely serve to jog their memories. Angel Mounds is 4 miles southwest of Camp Rosend. Here is mainly farmland, and my visit coincided with the beginning of the agricultural season. The site covers 600 acres and features 13 earthen mounds built between 1100 and 1450 AD by an indigenous people who had disappeared by the time Europeans arrived. Angel is the name of the British family who in 1852 began laying claim to the surrounding land. Each mound is a letter A to L in reference to the first and last letters of Angel. I'll chart a trail between them, recording anything that might be of interest to you. Here is Mound A. Mound B. Mound C. Mound D. Here's Mount E being burned by some locals, but they reassure me the fires are to rid the site of broom sage, an unwanted weed that strangles the growth of wildflowers. Mound F. Mound G. Mound H. Mound I. Mound J. Mound K. This is not a mound, but rather the former site of the Angel family farm. As you can see, not much remains of it. I couldn't find mound whatever, but I did find this structure. According to a local, J, I encountered hiding behind its walls. It was built in 1973. I asked Jay what the structure is, why he's hiding in it, but he doesn't answer. Instead, he gives me this postcard. It shows the structure with someone dressed in red standing looking at it. I later forward it to my employer along with notes of all observations. Sending the last update from my employer. Payment arrived along with a letter confirming my next assignment. I was to travel 1,006 miles to Westford, Massachusetts, there to make inquiries after a Mr. James Gunn. My employer gave no further instruction, but I'd learned not to bother asking questions. In Westford, I was staying with an associate of my employer called Jay. My room opened out onto a spacious balcony. To avoid implication in the events that were to follow, I was issued with a fake identity, that of Max Syedtollan, executor to a small inheritance. What my actual business was with Mr. Gunn remained unclear. I wondered if I ought to kill him. Jay introduced me to some locals, and I swiftly ingratiated myself. Here we are at a birthday party, one of them threw for my fake birthday. On the way home from the party, we chanced upon this flock of turkeys. My investigation so far had been fruitless, so I started following them, in case they were envoys of James Gunn, returning to their master. For a long while, the turkeys led me nowhere. We just spent ages circuiting various empty zones, but eventually we arrived at a patch of ground at the side of the road, which was fenced and had a sign next to it. The sign reads, Prince Henry, 1st Sinclair of Orkney, born in Scotland, made a voyage of discovery to North America. In 1398, after wintering in Nova Scotia, he sailed to Massachusetts. And in 1399, one of the party died. The effigy before you is a memorial to this night. James Gunn. I made a drawing of the effigy, and taking some biscuit crumbs from my pocket, began scattering them on the ground to pay thanks to my turkey guides, but they'd vanished. last assignment was received promptly. Over the 3 weeks that followed, I heard nothing from my employer. Awaiting further information, I returned to London. In my absence, several huge holes have appeared in the road by my flight. I spent much of this time wandering around taking photographs as if pretending to be a tourist. Here's one from when my uncle died, though I can't recall where it was taken. I took 130 photographs that day, but deemed only 3 worth keeping, and I can't remember why this one is important. 3 further weeks later, and the next letter arrived. I was apparently not the first to read it. It was already opened, roughly resealed with sellotape. There's no knowing who this was from or whether the letter was even genuine, but I couldn't risk ignoring the instructions in case they were, in fact, my employers. So for whatever reason, and on whoever's orders, I was going to Scotland. Elanagus is an island housing a replica of a 19th century hunting lodge completed in 2003 based on a destroyed building that was the site of a fake court established by 2 Victorian conmen claiming to be descended from the Stuart kings. These so-called brothers Sobieski Stuart were prolific counterfeiters who produced elaborate fictional documents purporting to be genuine historical artifacts. The journey to the replica had to be undertaken via a detour through the woods so as to avoid detection by the island's owners. After hours of wandering, I finally located it, taking this photograph in the last of the daylight. An investigation of the replica's exterior yielded the discovery of what appeared to be an entrance into the cellar. I was able to pick the lock and get in, descending into the foundations of the building. In truth, it was less a cellar, more a crawl space. Thorough investigation revealed no means of accessing the building above, but I did chance upon this engraved stone inscribed with a series of dates and scripts. I made rubbings of the dates which were clearly legible though of uncertain significance, 1973 and 1844, while making sketches of the scripts despite being unable to read them. As night had fallen, I was compelled to spend the night in the crawl space, though slept surprisingly well, waking only once at some point late in the night due to the distant sound of revelry, emanating from the replica above. Stationed in Cairo, staying in the home of an associate of my employer called Jay. Jay's house had a spacious balcony. Despite the adequacy of these dwellings, I couldn't sleep. The past week had been unrelenting, and I felt myself completely overstimulated. I started keeping a journal just to record everything I discovered. Much of this is now incomprehensible to me. For example, from the first page, what I did was I made a key say. If it was full, I would write a number. If it was half, I'd draw a circle. If it was a quarter, I would do a swirl. If it was a 3/4, I'd draw a square, and then I would add up the numbers, and my final answer was 104 centimeters cubed and 3/4. I've been instructed to track down the Saint Simonians, an order of French utopians who sought to revitalize the West by symbolically marrying it to the East via construction of the Suez Canal. They preach the inherent good of obedience to authority, that private property ought no longer determine social relations, that children become the property of the state. Jay was away during my stay, but I was introduced to his brother Jay. He insisted I took 3 pictures of him on each of his 3 sofas, but the other 2 were destroyed in the fire, so only this one, which you've already seen, is available. Jay explained to me the Saint Simonians used to hold meetings in his living room every Thursday evening where they would brainstorm ways of revitalizing the West via extravagant geo-architectural interventions. Jay's house was surrounded by spacious balconies, though did not itself have a spacious balcony, but it was situated quite near the Suez Canal, which is why they liked to meet there. After 3 days, I still couldn't sleep, so I spent the nights instead wandering town in search of pastries, but these proved surprisingly elusive. Although here is a picture of some cakes I found. They were fine. After 3 further weeks, I still couldn't sleep, and I was just completely bored with the whole experience, and the funding ran out, so yeah, that was it. There was one last picture I took. I remember quite clearly because it was the night I finally slept. It's not really very good anyway. And that's it.